Sadly, Dr. Martin Luther King died long ago, but he's about to preach another sermon. How is that possible? Stay tuned for Reach Out and Live. Welcome to Reach Out and Live, a program of music, scripture, and sermon brought to you each week by the many viewers and members of First-Plymouth Church, Lincoln, Nebraska. Hi, my name's Jim, minister here at First-Plymouth. Today we have our Plymouth Brass, the UNL University Singers. The congregation is ready for worship. I'll be preaching about a faith in God, so let's worship together.
Go with me on this vision that John writes about in Revelation. And in the Spirit, he carried me away to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It was the glory of God and a radiance like a very rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It was a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates were 12 angels. And on the gates are inscribed the names that are the names of the 12 tribes of Israelites. On the east gate, three gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. And on the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and on them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel who talked to me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and its walls. The city has 4 equal sides, its length the same as its width, and he measured it, the city, as with his rod. 12,000 stadia. Its length and its width and its height are equal.
Life creates intersections. I want to bring a sermon of Martin Luther King into this room right now. Now, this was Martin Luther King's favorite sermon, and I want it to resound here this morning. I'm not going to quote it. I'm not going to really follow it. I'm going to tell you of this sermon. He gave it at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when he was a candidate to become their pastor. He gave it at Ebenezer Baptist Church when he joined his father as pastor there. He gave this sermon probably 30 times all around America, but not here. I want to bring it, let it intersect into our space right now. The sermon was called The Three Dimensions of a Complete Life. And Martin Luther King chose chapter 21 in the book of Revelation, where there's this mystical vision of the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. And this image of the perfect city for Martin Luther King was the image of perfect humanity. And it's no surprise to me that he was caught up in this image of the perfect city, the perfect humanity, because all of his work was about making our cities ethical and humane. Cities like Montgomery or Birmingham or Selma. His whole life was about making cities ethical and humane. Selma, Chicago, LA. Dr. King knew that if our cities are ethical and humane, our states will become ethical and humane. And if our states are ethical and humane, our nation will become ethical and humane. And if our nation is, then the world can be better. So he starts this sermon with the New Jerusalem coming down to earth. And he notices that it has perfectly symmetrical dimensions, the same in length, breadth, and height. And he goes on then to preach a sermon that the complete human life must have that symmetry, that you must have equal dimensions in length and breadth and height. And he explains that the length of your life is not about how long you live, it's whether you will push forward in life and become who you're meant to be. The length dimension in our lives is you manifesting your inner powers. King thought this was essential, that each person know that they're created by God. You've been given gifts that you could bring to the world. And so the length of life is you forging your way to manifest who you really are. Finding your success, what that means to you, as you seek a flourishing life. And he said the length of life is important. But he says the problem is sometimes you'll get so caught up in making your way to be a success. You'll get so caught up in the project that is your individual life that you'll lose the other dimensions. You'll stay in the length dimension. In fact, Dr. King, in this sermon, always would say that white society tends to lose itself in the length dimension. They worry about their success, their safety, their security, and they lose the other dimensions. And then he would go on to preach about the dimension of breadth. That to lead a complete life, you have to find some way that you are working for the welfare of others. That's the breadth of life. And that you have to find concrete ways to manifest that dimension, because it will not be a complete life unless you do. If you're just stuck in the length, you also have to have breadth. Now, a beautiful grace of God is if you've ever had children, if you've raised children, you know what it's like to be caught up completely in the welfare of others. And you would have given yourself to that almost beyond your imagination to your children. And that is so beautiful. That's breadth. But Martin Luther King wanted to keep expanding our notion of breadth beyond our own families or beyond people that are just like us, to turn the world into a family. That would be breadth. A friend of mine was in Cairo, Egypt, a couple weeks ago, and he told me his guide was Muslim, and at one point the guide said to him, "Do you notice you're not seeing any homeless people?" He goes, "Yeah, what do you mean?" He goes, "You won't see any homeless people here, because as faithful Muslims, if you come across a homeless person, you are supposed to, by your faith, you're required to invite that person into your home, house them, and feed them." Whoa. I don't know if that's really true in Egypt, but what an image of breadth. Dr. King felt we are in a web of mutuality, an interconnecting universe where if someone else isn't doing well, you can't do well. You can't lead a complete life when others are suffering. So that dimension of breadth, we must bring everyone into that fullness. The length and the breadth. And then every time he preached this sermon, this is where he'd start to amp up, and he just would get his energy going, because when he got to the last dimension, the dimension of height, now we're right in his passion. The dimension of height has to do with your faith in God. Are you working in some way in your life to have that vertical dimension, that height, the vertical dimension of relationship with the spiritual realm? Because you cannot lead a complete life without length and breadth and height, that vertical dimension. Let me tell you, as a young man, Martin Luther King didn't believe in God. His dad was pastor of Ebenezer Baptist, and like a typical preacher's kid, when he was about 17, he was pretty sure he was atheist. He was an intellectual. He was reading some of the best books on atheism, and he was pretty sure, well, he didn't believe in God. And then when he went to Morehouse and got involved in that historical black college, and he realized, I want to be a minister, but not because he believed in God. No. He wanted to be a minister because he wanted to help the world better. And he just thought, that's how you do it. You become a minister to work for a better world. Dr. Martin Luther King didn't really believe in God until January 27th, 1956. Do you know of the kitchen table experience? Well, it changed him. He suddenly lived into the vertical dimension of life. Do you know about this? In 1956, he's a young pastor in Montgomery. The bus boycott had begun. You know, they bombed his house, they threatened him, and he was trying to manage this, young pastor trying to manage this movement, and it just became too much. He was at the end of his rope, and he came home late one night, that January 27th, and Coretta was already asleep. And he's standing there in the living room thinking, I cannot do this anymore. And the phone rang. He picked up the phone, and it was this surly voice saying, get out of Montgomery or you will die. He put the phone down. He'd been threatened so many times, bombs and attacked. He couldn't handle it anymore. He goes into the kitchen, and he bowed over the kitchen table, and he began to pray out loud. Let me go to his words. I was trying to think of a way to move out of the picture without looking like a coward. I was in a state of exhaustion. My courage was gone. I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the table, and it's still vivid to my memory what I was praying. I said, I'm here trying to take a stand for what I believe is right, but now I'm afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I'm at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point I cannot face it alone. And it was at that moment he said he experienced God. He had never been sure he believed in God, but then he experienced God.
He said, the presence of the divine came upon me. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, stand for justice, stand for truth. I will be at your side. He said his uncertainty disappeared. He re-steeled himself and became history. At this point in the sermon, Martin Luther King would just spill out with passion that if you're going to lead a complete human life, you have to have the vertical dimension in some way. But my friends, I think a faith in God is pretty hard these days. I do. We're all so caught in our material lives. I mean, we're just caught up in our material challenges and in the busyness and hubbub. I think a lot of us just don't get around to it. I mean, it's not so much that we disbelieve in God, we just don't get around to believing in God. I mean, we got a lot going on, and we're so just immersed in the material world, we lose the vertical. I talk to many people that just don't seem to care much. There's no animus. They're not against the faith in God. It's just not really on their agenda. There's a new word called apatheism. And this word is so telling. And I talk to people that I think are apatheists. You see, they're not atheists. That word means energetically, I don't believe in God. An apatheist just doesn't care much. They're indifferent. Well, it's interesting to talk to someone because, again, they're not mean-spirited in any way. It's just not on their agenda, that vertical dimension. Now, you know the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Well, so too, my friends, the opposite of faith isn't disbelief. The opposite of faith is indifference also. And it's almost impossible to even engage with someone that just thinks the vertical dimension doesn't matter at all, and they're not ornery about it. It just doesn't matter. I think faith in God is hard. We're so busy. We're so consumed. Faith in God is hard because of churches, too. I think that. I think we've all seen so many churches go sideways and act in strange ways, or their beliefs seem ridiculous, or whatever. I think churches can make a faith in God difficult. To my mind, it's almost as if there's only two kinds of churches these days. Just two kinds. You've got churches that are like really energetic, and I love this. They're really intense, and I love it, and they're exciting and relational. They got, music that'll jack you up, and it's really awesome. But they can have kind of weird theology, that puts down gay people or puts down women or is exclusive or it's overly literal. So it's like a really cool church, but its theology kind of sucks. And I shouldn't say sucks in the pulpit, but it kind of does. And then you've got another kind of church that has really hip intellectual theology that is expansive and magnanimous, and it's inclusive, and it's smart and caring, and those churches can be kind of boring. I'm not talking about our church. Well, I might be talking about our church, I don't know. There's only two kinds of churches, I think, and it doesn't seem like that other kind has the intensity of the vertical dimension. It matters to the human life, and you got to get after it. And so I think a faith in God can be hard when you only have two kinds of churches in the world. Faith in God is hard. I talk to people all the time, and they say, you tell me about a God of love and power, but I look out at the world and it's a place of suffering and tragedy, injustice. How am I to reconcile that? I can't believe in God, and that is a hugely ethical stance to take. I think a faith in God is hard. To understand that, I talk to people who think that faith in God is all or nothing. You either believe in God or you don't. But that's the classic logical fallacy. It's a cognitive mistake to turn something into all or nothing. A faith in God isn't all or nothing. You can't completely believe in God. You cannot totally believe in God because God is infinite. God is inscrutable. God is beyond our ken. You can't have complete belief in God, but you can have some. You could even just have an inkling. And the vertical dimension comes into your life if you even just turn a little bit towards the possibility of God. I'm a long way from King's original sermon, but the passion he would have on this notion that do not fail in your life to bring in the vertical dimension. It must be a vigorous verticality with some energy, some excitement and drive to bring the vertical into your life. It's got to be a vigorous verticality, and it's got to be a versatile verticality. You got to find your own way. This is the versatility that's demanded. There'll be some way you can relate to the spiritual realm, some way that you can turn towards God. So your verticality has to be vigorous, but it's got to be versatile as well. But not only that, it's got to be a veridical verticality. It's got to be something that's true. It's got to be about the highest ideals. It can't be some silly notion of God. It can't be some unjust notion of God. It's got to be a true high ideal. So it's got to be vigorous, and it's got to be versatile, and it's got to be veridical. This verticality, and not just that. This verticality, it's got to be verbalized. We're social beings. You've got to bring the vertical into your life, and you have to talk about it with others. That's why we have church. You have to talk about this, about seeking a faith in God with others. It's got to be a verbalized verticality. It's got to be vigorous verticality and veridical verticality and versatile verticality, and it's got to be a verbalized verticality. Do not fail to bring the vertical dimension into our lives. God wants you to have a complete life. So seek what your true purpose is. Manifest yourself. Find a way to develop concern for others. Don't fail to go vertical. Amen.
am so glad that we could worship together, and I hope it has brought you some peace and inspiration. Do you know you can join our worship services live every Sunday at 9, 10:30, or 11:59 on Facebook, YouTube, or our website? And all of that is made possible by gifts from people like you.
If you believe that an open-minded, loving congregation can help change the world, then consider making a donation. It will help us increase the love of God and neighbor, both in Nebraska and the world. If you would like to learn more about our church, go to firstplymouth.org. You can watch videos of the sermons, learn about our many programs and missions, then follow us to Facebook and become a friend.
We now worship online at 9 a.m. and 10:30 on YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, and our website. We also add live events, so join us online. And so, my friends, remember, you don't have to have a complete faith in God. That's probably impossible. God is infinite, beyond our comprehension. But if you just trust that there is God, oh my, what begins to happen? Oh my, how we can reach out and live.
Tune in again next week for another edition of Reach Out and Live.